Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I dive on into today's review, do want to remind you if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a couple of ways. First, by making a one-time donation by way of PayPal, or by becoming a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links down in the show notes. Also, down in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. So be sure to hang with the gang over on Discord. Today, I am going to be sharing my thoughts and my review of Coriolis, the Great Dark from Free League Publishing. This 308-page hardcover is supposed to arrive in stores tomorrow, August 12th. It's going to carry an MSRP of $49.99. If you order directly from Free League Publishing, you will receive the PDF absolutely free. Although I do want to mention, if you order from Free League, the price is a little bit different from the MSRP. It's usually about $3 or $4 more. But if you want to grab that PDF, get it for free with your hard copy, probably want to order through Free League Publishing. Speaking of the PDF, it is not available as of yet. I'm going to guess it is going to arrive at DriveThruRPG tomorrow also. And I'll guess it's probably going to sell for around $24.99 to $29.99, somewhere in that range. All right, having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera, because here I've got Coriolis of the Great Dark. A few things to mention before I get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Free League Publishing were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. I also want to mention I took a pretty deep dive into Coriolis the Great Dark by way of a first look and page through video prior to me leaving for Gen Con. If you want to get a closer look at what you're going to find inside Coriolis the Great Dark, you might want to also give that video a peek. First thing we're going to do is take a look at the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life, so let's give credit where credit is due. If you're not familiar with Coriolis the Great Dark, it is the latest edition of Coriolis. This builds on the previous edition, Coriolis the Third Horizon, although this is set 200 years in the future from that setting, and it's also in a completely different area of space. In fact, a group of people from the Third Horizon found this beacon, and they thought it was this great generational ship that was carrying humanity. So they assembled a fleet, they go off in search of it, and sadly, that's not what the beacon is. All these people find themselves, well, what they think is trapped in this section of space. Turns out there are portals, there are ways for them to enter what's known as the slipstream in order to travel in starships. As far as the player characters, they are taking on the roles of explorers working for the Explorers Guild, because the main focus of Coriolis the Great Dark is on exploration and delving into the ruins of the builders in order to find knowledge and artifacts, because that's what essentially gives life to what's known as Ship City, which is a city which was assembled by the survivors of the trip to this section of space from the ships that survived as part of the fleet. So now keep in mind, Ship City is not the only human settlement. There are some outposts, there are some settlements, but Ship City is the main hub. It is really the home base for the player characters. Now, I found the character creation to be pretty interesting. Of course, Coriolis the Great Dark is powered by the Year Zero engine. I'll talk about that mechanically in just a few moments. But I thought the way you create the characters is pretty interesting because you'll have an origin and then you get to select an archetype, but then the archetype has different specialties which provide you with different talents, different skills. You'll have different equipment. Really cool stuff here. I thought this was really nicely done, and it provides the opportunity to randomly create everything as far as your player character goes, or you can just simply select what you like best instead of rolling randomly on different tables. So we have the different archetypes. We also have different roles in the crew because, as I mentioned, one of the main focuses of Coriolis the Great Dark is the exploration of these ruins, these delves. So regardless of what your archetype is as a player character, you will have a role in the crew that is what you focus on during the delves. So you might be the scout, or you might be the guard, or you might be the scientist who tries to figure things out, try to understand the clues that you're finding or the information that you're running across. So I thought that was kind of interesting too, that regardless of your archetype, you're not going to be locked into a particular role. So as an example, if you're a soldier, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the guard as far as the delves. I thought that was pretty cool too. Now, as far as the mechanics, this does use kind of a lighter weight version of the Year Zero engine. Year Zero engine is a D6 dice pool mechanic. So what you're going to do is you are going to have your attributes. Here, we've got fairly traditional attributes, although they've got different titles to them. So instead of intelligence, we have logic, we have perception, and so forth. So you're going to have a number 1, 2, maybe 3, probably not as a starting character. For your attributes, you'll also have skills. You'll also have talents, which can add dice to your pool. There's also equipment, which might give you gear dice that you can utilize. So you basically create a pool of 6-sided dice. You're going to roll that pool and you're looking to find 6s. Any 6 means it's a success. Now, multiple 6s means that it is a much higher success. So mechanically, very, very easy. The game master is going to determine, based upon what the player is trying to have their character do, what attribute corresponds with that, what skill is going to correspond with that. The player totals those numbers together, sees if maybe they have a piece of equipment that's going to give them some gear dice. They're going to roll all of those 6-sided dice and hope to find some 6s to succeed. If they fail, they can push their roll. Now, you can only push rolls that are the player character trying to do something. You cannot push rolls that are reactions to something. It's when a character is proactively trying to do something, you can do a pushed roll. And if you roll 1s, then you have some trouble. If you roll a 1 on the gear die during a push roll, that is going to actually degrade your equipment. And then you can repair equipment to try to get those gear dice back. It is possible that that piece of equipment, that piece of gear is broken beyond any repair, but pretty interesting aspect there. We do have hope, we have heart, and we have health. So we have different types of damage, essentially, that takes place. Hope plays a huge role in Coriolis the Great Dark. That's why this is not a grim, dark setting. These people are hopeful. They are not just resigned to their fates or anything along those lines. Now, should also mention combat. There are some options in combat as well. So it's not real abstract. So there's a little bit of crunch, not a bunch. And I got to be honest, as far as Coriolis the Great Dark goes, I think the level of complexity for action resolution as well as combat is a nice fit for this particular game. Now, the great majority of the page space of this core book is devoted to the setting. So we do have information about rolling up characters as well as the mechanics of the game and how game masters create these delves into ruins. We also have a short introductory adventure too, but the great majority of the page space is devoted to defining this setting. Now, if you're familiar with Coriolis Third Horizon, that had a bit of a Middle Eastern flavor to the proceedings. This does not. This actually has more of an 18th, 19th century European vibe to the design style. In fact, kind of has an Eastern European sort of look to the dress, the clothing, things like that. Kind of give me a bit of a 18th, 19th century Russian look, which is pretty cool. I like that. Artwork throughout is really well done. It is all, I do believe, by Martin Grip. And the presentation of Coriolis, the Great Dark, is really, really well done. This is going to be an easy game for players and game masters to wrap their heads around as far as playing it. Now, I will point out the major adversary of Coriolis, the Great Dark, is the Blight. And the Blight isn't exactly defined. Well, it's sort of defined, but it's made up of different things. So there's almost kind of like a Lovecraftian cosmic horror vibe to the Blight, because the Blight can cause despair and the loss of hope. It also can be a physical manifestation, which the longer that the explorers are out in space exploring these ruins starts to wear on them. It can also create creatures of the Blight. So really interesting stuff here, I thought. And it leaves the Blight open to different interpretations almost. Like I said, it's not strongly defined. Now, some people will hate that aspect of the Blight. I think it's kind of interesting in that respect. Now, I talked about how one of the big focuses of Coriolis the Great Dark is the exploration. It's the delves into these ruins. Something else that's going to be very important is Ship City. So at least from the core book, the focus of Coriolis the Great Dark is going to be adventures which deal with the politics as well as the power struggle behind the scenes of Ship City, as well as the explorers setting out to different places to explore these ruins and to find knowledge and artifacts of the builders and such. I really like this map of Ship City. I do wish it was a pullout as opposed to being across 2 pages here. But you're going to get a bunch of information about the different factions. There are different guilds which publicly cooperate with each other. But of course, behind closed doors, there's a lot of backbiting. There's a lot of jockeying for position and power, which of course, the player characters can find themselves directly in the midst of. Now, the player characters do belong to the Explorers Guild. It is a new guild that has been formed kind of by tricking the other guilds into allowing for its formation. So the Explorers Guild is going to play into the proceedings for the player characters quite a bit as well. Now, of course, Ship City, as I mentioned, is not the only human settlement out there. There are some outposts and settlements. So it's not as if the player characters always have to return to Ship City, but it is going to be their base of operations, as will be their great ship. So the player characters are just some of many explorers who are off searching through space for these various different unexplored worlds or partially explored worlds where they're going to be aiming to find these ruins of the builders. So they travel on great ships. Now, I should point out, there really isn't a ton of information about starship travel, space travel, or space combat in this core book. I can't tell you if that's something that we'll see later on down the line, or if that's just not going to be something that's a huge focus. I will take a guess. Space combat probably is not going to be a big focus. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have any sort of combat with the shuttles that the explorers use or the ground vehicles that they use. Yes, we've got stat blocks for those. We have rules for vehicular combat as well. But as far as big starships or great ships duking it out, we do not have rules for that. We do have a section that's going to break down the procedure of a delve for game masters to create delves. We're going to have a lot of different random tables. This is an example of a delve. It also gives you some information about the various different roles that are going to be utilized during these delves. As I mentioned before, each of the player characters will have a role that they play in the delves. Usually it's going to be something that's going to play to their strengths. We do have a small bestiary of different creatures. Gotta say, kind of light on the artwork in the bestiary, but there is a good variety of really odd, strange, some of them horrific things in the bestiary. In fact, like we have phenomena. And these tend to be fairly broad in their approach too. But as you can see, it's not as if we have, huge multi-page stat blocks and stat entries for these. Now, there's something else that's really interesting with Coriolis, the Great Dark, and it is the birds. So there are these constructs which humans have found. First of all, they just thought they were pets to begin with, but it turns out they're actually creatures that were created by the builders in order to battle the Blight. So each crew is going to have its own bird that accompanies it. The bird is going to have its own special powers, its special abilities. Of course, the bird, like the player characters, can level up as well and improve itself. I thought it was pretty interesting because the bird doesn't necessarily always listen to its crew or its master. I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe you want the bird to do something and it just doesn't feel like doing it because it is its own thinking creature. It is not necessarily a pet or a familiar that the player characters are going to utilize. Here we've got some tables for creating delves. We've got some more information. This is the Game Master section of the book, which is going to be talking about how to run the game. As far as combat, like I mentioned before, it's not super crunchy, but there are critical injuries here. And while it appears that player characters aren't real squishy, because a lot has to happen for a player character to take a dirt nap, there are some critical injuries which are instant death. I always like critical hits. I'm a fan of those. And I got to say, the critical injuries table is not something that's going to get in the way of the flow of combat either. So it's essentially if the player character or NPC takes damage equal to or more than the critical threshold of the weapon, then a critical injury will take place. Also, if the player character or NPC is brought down to 0 health, then you also will have a critical injury. Although the reality is most NPCs, the game master is just going to kill them off, not bother with critical injuries. So we do get a bit of an introductory adventure, and then we wrap up with solitaire rules. And I gotta say, I was kind of surprised. There are quite a few pages devoted to solitaire play. The reality is, I gotta be honest, I would have rather seen the solitaire rules maybe in a PDF or a supplement that you could order, kind of like the Strider mode that we've got for the One Ring, where you can get that PDF or you could order that little booklet. And I would have rather had more page space devoted to maybe a second introductory adventure, or maybe get into a little more detail about maybe space combat or space travel. But that's just me. I know a lot of folks out there are going to be thrilled with the fact that there is a substantial section about solitaire play in Coriolis, the Great Dark. So that is a peek inside Coriolis, the Great Dark. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. Gotta say, I'm impressed by Coriolis, the Great Dark, but it's from Free League Publishing. That kind of goes without saying. But before I get into my final thoughts, I do want to mention, kind of sorry to see Free League Publishing move away from the third horizon with Coriolis, because it had a really unique setting. It had a really unique style and flavor to it and presentation to it. It had a Middle Eastern flavor, kind of a Tales of the Arabian Nights sort of vibe to it. Now, I know there were some folks out there who claimed that Coriolis, the Third Horizon, was an Islamic role-playing game. It was nothing near that. But I do understand why Free League Publishing and the designers of Coriolis, the Great Dark, moved away from the Third Horizon, although I am sorry to see that. As far as Coriolis, the Great Dark, really interesting setting, really interesting vibe to the proceedings as well. I think it's kind of cool how the player characters are explorers. They're really important in the life cycle of Ship City, but they aren't necessarily like superheroes off to save the day. They travel around on great ships being transported to various different planets, but they're not the only crew of explorers. So there are other explorers out there, which the player characters' crews are actually in competition with. So I thought that was interesting as well. As far as the production quality, top notch, as we come to expect from Free League Publishing. Love the artwork throughout. Really, really well done. Book is very nicely put together. Presentation, easy to get through. Now, there are some quibbles that I've got with the game, and one of them is the solitaire rules. I have nothing against solitaire play. A vast majority of people out there who buy role-playing game books are not playing solitaire. So what I would have liked to have seen is Free League Publishing do the same thing they did with the One Ring with their solitaire mode. It was just a separate item. Now, they could have made it absolutely free as a PDF, not a problem. Maybe taken that additional page space that was devoted to the solitaire rules and fleshed out the introductory adventure a bit more, maybe included the second introductory adventure. Because the introductory adventure that's included with Coriolis, the Great Dark, is really short. And I gotta be honest, I would have liked to have seen a lot more interaction with Ship City, because I have the feeling that your two main aspects of Coriolis, the Great Dark, is the political machinations going on Ship City and how the explorers get tied into that, being members of the Explorers Guild, and going out on the delves into the ruins. I think those are your two main focuses in the game. So I would have liked to have seen a bit more presented as an adventure. Now, there is a campaign that's on the horizon. I believe it's going to be a box set because it's going to include dice. It's also going to include, I believe, the initiative cards for combat. I'm very interested to see what we get with that. So that should be pretty cool. Something else I was kind of surprised at, really not a lot of information about like space combat. In fact, really nothing about space combat. We have vehicular combat, so we have planetary combat. But then again, maybe it's because the great ships and the merchant ships traveling the slipstreams really don't have anyone to go toe to toe with. That's a possibility. Once again, like I said, the player characters are explorers. They really don't have anything to do with the day-to-day operations of the great ships. So maybe that's another reason why we really don't have anything about starship combat or really space travel in detail either. Now, we do get plenty of detail about the setting. We get loads of detail about Ship City as well as the factions there. We have information about the various areas of charted space or relatively charted space, as well as the different settlements and outposts that are out there too. So there's a lot crammed into this book. There really, really is. And of course, the Year Zero engine is very easy for players and game masters to grasp right off the bat. I also like the fact that we've got combat. It's got a little bit of crunch, not too much crunch. And we have those critical injuries that can take place. I think that'll add a lot of flavor to the combat proceedings as well. So at the end of the day, I really like Coriolis, the Great Dark. Yes, okay, I have some quibbles, but all in all, I think this is really nicely done. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Coriolis, the Great Dark, an 8.5 out of 10. I don't necessarily think that it'll be everybody's bag of tricks, but I think if you're looking for a very unique setting with some interesting aspects to the gameplay that it's focusing on, you're definitely going to want to take a peek at Coriolis, the Great Dark. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.